I mean, I was inspired a lot by point-and-click adventures that I played. Back then, especially in the 90s when CD-ROM arrived, there were a lot of adventure games that started to use voice and music and those things. And some of those games like Gabriel Knight or Day of the Tentacle, games I really admired. And I think told stories better than any games I've done so far. So that really intrigued me. I played adventures before that too, but they were simpler things. But now that you could have beautiful animations, proper voice acting, good storytelling, that made me want to try that. But what inspired The Longest Journey was basically, not a lot of people know this, but The Longest Journey started as a platform game.
Oh.
Yeah. And it was started as a platform game because that's what the art director wanted to do, and at that point I sort of came on board. And the game wasn't really what The Longest Journey ended up being. It was more sort of a game about two worlds, basically science and magic. But I didn't really feel that a platform game was the best way to tell a story. So I worked with the art director and we came up with a completely new story, and that just seemed to fit the point-and-click genre a lot better. What inspired it was everything I've read and seen, and when you're a storyteller, you draw inspiration from the things you like. So mythology, fairy tales, Neil Gaiman, a lot of comic books. But I think for me, especially sort of having lived in New York, I drew a lot of inspiration for the city in The Longest Journey, and being a big fan of fantasy in general, and fairy tales and dark fantasy, sort of shaped the other world. And it was just about bringing all that together. But games are collaborative, so there's no single idea or single source of inspiration. It's more sort of how all those things come together and all the people come together, and then you spend time making something, and what comes out at the other end is sort of a product of that. It's like a child of all those different ideas and genes. That's a good question. I mean, game developers in general making new worlds. I'm a world builder. I love basically shaping worlds from the outset. I often like starting with our world and changing it a little bit. Like both The Longest Journey takes place in our world in the future. Same with Dreamfall. There's a game I made called The Secret World, which is basically the world today, but with magical creatures and monsters. So I like that. I like taking something that's familiar and understandable, and then twisting it, changing it, and then maybe putting the player into a role of somebody who's experiencing that change. So you play somebody who's normal, who's then faced with the abnormal or the supernatural, and having to respond to that. But it's also about mythologizing reality and embracing the mystical. I like that. I like feeling there are still secrets, and that there are still secret places, that there are still things we don't know. That fascinates me, and being able to sort of create stories about that, I think, is what drives those ideas. Of course, you're always influenced by the people in your life, but I don't think I've ever created characters that are sort of, this character is really that person. I think a lot of it is just sort of coming up with interesting voices. I would like when we made April Ryan the lead character of The Longest Journey. It's sort of, I knew I wanted to have a young woman who came to a big city and who sort of we could see through the eyes of and experience everything as though it was new and interesting and exciting. And it wasn't then based on a particular person, but it was based on the voice I wanted. And not the voice actor, but more sort of like who that person is, how she sees the world, how she talks to people, how she interacts. And I think that goes for everything. I don't think I'm very inspired by people I meet or see, but more about sort of ideas of voices in my head and ideas that resonate with me, whether it's a person of a certain ethnicity or nationality or just a person with a certain history, and I just want to tell their stories. And it's hard to tell where it comes from, but as everything else, you're inspired by everything you read and see, but yeah, there are definitely characters that come from, let's say, nothing and just happen. It's accidents. I feel like Longest Journey was a traditional adventure. Yeah. Dreamfall was not. It was something completely different. It still had adventure elements, but it also had a fully 3D world. It had some other game mechanics. Then I worked on The Secret World, which is an MMO RPG, but with adventure type quests. So I always like changing things, mixing things, trying new things, but also think that there will always be a piece of adventure in every game I make, because I care a lot about that way of telling stories. But adventure games have sort of become part of everything. Even football games these days, FIFA games come with like an adventure game in it, the career modes, and Call of Duty has sections you walk around and talk to people. So it's not like there's a black and white separation between adventure games and everything else these days. It's more so that adventure games have invaded and assimilated a lot of other genres. And that's what I find interesting. So new ways of mixing adventure into game genres is what I'm interested in. With Dreamfall Chapters, we had sort of 5 releases because we made 5 episodes, and I think that process changed along the way. But for me, it always starts with an idea about some characters in a world. I say, love to make a game about an American who travels to Norway in 1923 looking for his missing sister, because that sort of cements it. That starts with a story you can tell. That immediately gets people interested. And from there we basically see, and we would like to make this a 3D first-person exploration game, because that's a genre that that we like and that we'd love to do something in. And from that point on, it becomes a question of involving various people, where they sort of brainstorming about, so who is the main character? Where does he come from? Why is he, and why is he here? What's the plot of the game? You start to outline that. But all the elements is just a series of brainstorming and people trying things out. You might go to the artist and say, we're going to do this, Norwegian village in 1923, and they'll start doing research and say, look at this is cool, they have this thing. And it's like, oh yeah, let's use that in the game. It is always an iterative, collaborative process, but then within the boundaries. And I'm often the person who says, I'm an ideas person, but I'm also a person who says, you know what, now that goes outside the box we made for ourselves. We don't have time to do that, or we need to the game is really not about that. So it's often about like sort of trying and thinking about things and then bringing it back to what the game is supposed to be. In terms of people, I mean, you always need a mix of, designers or artists. Sound is really important to us. Animators, of course. And again, to have all those people involved as much as possible from the beginning, taking part in shaping and creating the idea, that's really important. It is a collaborative effort, and it is sometimes about sitting in a room for hours and just talking loudly and throwing ideas out and criticizing ideas and embracing ideas, then writing it down and then trying to pull from that, like, all right, we need 3 different types of houses. We need a user interface that looks like this, you know, and then trying to create lists from all those ideas and then see, do we have time to make this? I could talk for hours about it, but I think it's different from everybody. Every studio that makes games, different for every individual. But for us, it really is about sort of the world and the characters and the script. And then from there, the mechanics emerge, and then the script might change, and the mechanics might change until we have a finished game. Everything. I like everything. Except probably sports games. I don't play any sports games. And I'm not really good at like very difficult strategy games. But I try to play everything. I like open world games. I've been playing Zelda a lot.
The new one, yes.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. That's actually the first Zelda game I've ever liked. I didn't really like. I liked Wind Waker a bit, but the older ones didn't really capture me. I like role-playing games. I do still play adventure games. I played Broken Age, and I thought that was beautiful. I really like racing games, so I play pretty much all types of racing games. I would never make a racing game, but I really like racing games. I feel it's my job to try a bit of everything. So sometimes I only play a game for maybe 2, 3, 4 hours, and then I put it aside and I never play it again. And games are too big these days. Yeah. So I love Assassin's Creed, but after 15 hours, I'm like, I'm done. Like I don't want to play this anymore. Like it's great, but I don't have time. I have to play something else. So I have less time to play than ever before, but I play just as many games, and I buy pretty much all games that come out and try them. But I like mixing genres. I like taking inspiration from everything, and I think can be important things to be found in games that are totally different from the types of games you make. Even sports games, there are inspiration to be had. I think there's more variety now. There's a lot of different types of adventure games. You have the Wadjet Eye games, and he makes like very classic pixel art point-and-click games, and they do really well. And then you had games like Broken Age, for example, that are beautiful animated movies, but still quite traditional. The Telltale games, which are more interactive stories than sort of classic adventures. But yeah, you're right, there's been a sort of renaissance of it, and I think it's because of distribution, because you don't need to reach as many people anymore to really have success. You can find your audience on Steam and you can sell directly to them. Tools are easier and cheaper these days. You can make games a lot easier, and therefore, you can make more niche games. So I think there's a lot of variety, and mobile phones have a lot of great adventure games as well that are completely different from anything else you see, because it's all about whether it's hidden object where you sort of use your finger, or again, interactive novels or stories. Can't remember, there was a game that came out that it's very sort of text heavy, but it's about making choices in the text, and there's so much variety and it's so interesting, and I don't think we lost anything. I think it's evolved and become a lot more interesting than it was 20 years ago. I've been super lucky. I've gotten so many great emails and even letters from people talking about it, and from people from 8 years old to 80 years old, and I'm not kidding. But I think the most interesting one was actually a letter I got once many years ago that basically said, it said, I know you took my diary because Longest Journey is obviously based on me and my life, and I lost my diary in, I think they said 1998 or something like that, and I don't want to hurt you or anything, I just want my diary back. And well, first off, that diary was lost long after we started making the game, but secondly, I just felt like it almost felt like the beginning of a movie in a way, sort of like somebody contacts you and say the thing you made is based on their life, and it's like, it makes you sit there and question like, wow, is that actually true? Did this person actually live this? Of course, probably not that person was so unfortunately probably somebody with with problems, but it was definitely something that stuck with me, that there was somebody out there who thinks that the longest journey is based on their life, and that's interesting.
Yeah, person who played through it and thought.
Yeah, and then like, no, wait a second, this is my life. I wrote this in my diary about my life. So yeah, that's both sad and beautiful in a way. Yeah, I talked about this the other day actually to somebody, and it's you always have sort of an idea where you want to go when you start writing a story, but stories always change along the way, and the more time passes and the more you change as a person, the stories change, and you do want people to feel like that this was the story from the beginning, and some elements are, some things are set, and I'm not going to say what, but some things have always been there. But the details and the way people talk and the way they interact and some of the characters are definitely things that have changed along the way, and we have to do that because I'm not the same person I was back when Longest Journey was made, and I don't care about the same things, and the world has changed. So you adapt with that, and the stories change with that. And if you don't do that, then you'll probably be outdated, and it's going to feel less honest. But I think with the Longest Journey, the important part, the April's journey, that is the same as what we wrote down 25 years ago. And and the story is still at heart the same story, but the details change, and the way the story is told, and the characters and voices change. No, we didn't know. We knew the story wasn't finished, and there were sort of ideas about where the characters would end up, but there was no plan to make the Longest Journey. Because after every game, I'm like, I don't want to do that again. I want to do something completely different. And then some time passes and you go like, I really want to go back and revisit those characters. So it wasn't spontaneous. It was sort of like, we should probably continue the story somehow. But I also didn't want to continue the same story or with the same characters. I wanted to tell a new story that had sort of some of the same themes and sort of intersected in the way or ran parallel to it. And the same went for Dreamfall Chapters. We had planned to make a sequel to Dreamfall, but then time passed, and after a while it was sort of like, I guess that's not going to happen. And then suddenly the chance comes and you're like, okay, yeah, we should. And then you sit down and you look at what you've written before and you go like, yeah, we need to keep this, but everything else here we can see, what has changed in the time between, the 10 years that have gone past since we made the last game, and but it's usually when I finish a game, I don't think about the sequel immediately. I think about like, let's do something completely different now.